Hey there. Tonight we're going somewhere quieter than battlefields, deeper than prophecy, to a story that begins not with thunder, but with a mother's heartbreak. You'll drift through the life of Rhea, the Titaness who held the world together even as it threatened to tear her apart. She was Queen of Heaven before Hera ever took the title, mother to gods before mortals ever knew their names, and the one who defied a tyrant not with strength, but with something far more dangerous, a mother's cunning and a mother's love. You'll meet a goddess who gave birth to Olympus itself, who wrapped stones in blankets and hid babies in mountain caves, who danced to drums and clashed shields to drown out infant cries. She stood at the hinge of two ages, the Titans and the Olympians, and without her quiet rebellion, Zeus would never have risen, and the world you know from these old stories would never have begun. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it actually brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there, falling asleep to the same old stories. So settle in, let the ancient world unfold around you, and let's begin at the very beginning, when the earth was young and the sky pressed down upon it like a weight. Before there were temples or prayers, before mortals walked the earth or heroes carved their names into legend, there was only the vast and endless union of earth and sky. Gaia, broad and patient, lay beneath everything that would ever grow or walk or breathe. Uranus, cold and distant, arched above her like a dome of stars and wind. Together they made the first children, beings of impossible size and terrible beauty, neither quite mortal nor fully divine. The process of their creation was slow, not like the quick, gasping birth of mortals, but something that took years, decades, centuries perhaps. Time moved differently in those days. There were no seasons yet to mark its passing, no sun to rise and set in regular rhythm. There was only the long, patient accumulation of power and form. Gaia felt them growing inside her. Not in a womb exactly, but in the deep places of the earth, in caverns that had no entrance, in spaces between stone where divinity condensed like dew. Each child was a concentration of elemental force, a piece of the world given consciousness and will. 12 of them emerged from that primordial marriage, 6 sons and 6 daughters born of stone and starlight, of soil and storm. They were the Titans, the first generation of gods, and they would shape the bones of the world itself. Among them was Rhea. Her birth was gentler than some of the others. When Oceanus emerged, rivers burst forth across the world, carving valleys and filling seas. When Hyperion came, the first light that was not starlight blazed across the sky. When Cronus was born, time itself seemed to shudder and begin its long march forward. But Rhea arrived quietly. There was no catastrophe, no grand announcement. One moment the earth was still, and the next she was standing on its surface, fully formed, breathing air that had never been breathed before. She looked like her mother, they said later, broad-faced and steady-eyed, with hair the colour of rich soil and skin that seemed to shift between the gold of wheat fields and the deep green of forest moss. She moved with the grace of rivers, unhurried and inevitable, and when she spoke, her voice had the quality of wind through trees, soothing and constant. The first thing she did was laugh, not at anything in particular, simply because she could. Because breath was new and sound was new and the sensation of existing was so strange and wonderful that laughter was the only response that made sense. Her siblings emerged around her one by one. Themis, serious even at birth, examining the world with a critical eye as if already measuring it against some invisible standard. Mnemosyne, who immediately began memorizing everything she saw, committing the moment of creation to perfect recall. Tethys, who ran to the nearest water source and dove in, swimming with natural ease. Thea, who lifted her hands and seemed to catch light between her fingers, delighted by the way it bent and shimmered. And her brothers. Oceanus, massive and restless, pacing the edges of the world. Caius, thoughtful and withdrawn, already asking questions no one could answer. Creus, who climbed the highest mountain he could find and stood there as if trying to see beyond the edge of existence. Hyperion, luminous and warm, who would one day father the sun itself. Iapetus, who had about him an air of future tragedy, though none of them knew it yet. And Cronus, the youngest, the last-born, the sharp-minded one who watched everything and said little. They were children of the earth and sky, and for a time they were content to simply be. They explored the world that was their birthright. They learned the feel of grass beneath their feet, the taste of spring water, the way wind felt against skin. They discovered that they could change shape if they concentrated, could grow tall as mountains or small as mice, though their natural forms were somewhere in between. She was not the eldest. That honor belonged to Oceanus, who would one day wrap the world in a ring of endless water. Nor was she the youngest, for Cronus came last, sharp-minded and patient in ways that would prove both blessing and curse. But Rhea was something else. She was steady. She was gentle. Her name meant flow and ease, and in time people would say that she embodied both, the eternal flow of generations, the ease of comfort and rest. She had sisters who glittered with their own strange powers. Themis, who knew the laws that even gods must follow. Mnemosyne, who remembered everything that had ever been or would ever be. Tethys, who cradled rivers in her arms like children. Thea, who caught light in her hands and scattered it across the sky. And Phoebe, whose mind turned like the moon, always half in shadow. And she had brothers, vast and elemental, who stood like pillars at the edges of creation. Oceanus, Caius, Creus, Hyperion, Iapetus, and Cronus. Each one held dominion over forces mortals could barely name. For a time they lived beneath their father, not on earth, but within it. Uranus, disturbed by his own offspring, by their size and strangeness, by the way they reminded him too much of power he did not want challenged, shoved them back into Gaia, back into the womb of the world. And there they remained, cramped in darkness, half-born and furious. Gaia, their mother, felt every moment of it, the weight of them, the ache of carrying beings who should have walked free under open sky. And so she did what mothers do when their children are threatened. She plotted rebellion. She forged a great sickle from flint, grey and sharp as grief, and called to her children in the dark. One by one she asked them, "Who will free us? Who will stand against your father?" Most stayed silent. Fear, perhaps, or simply exhaustion. But Cronus, the youngest, sharp-eyed and patient, took the blade. And when Uranus descended once more to press himself against the earth in that endless, suffocating embrace, Cronus struck. One terrible swing, the sky bled. Uranus recoiled, castrated and screaming, and from his wounds strange things were born. The Furies, the giants, the nymphs of ash trees who would one day walk battlefields and mourn the spears made from their wood. And from the foam where his severed flesh fell into the sea, rising wet and perfect and impossibly beautiful, came Aphrodite. But that's another story. With Uranus overthrown, the Titans were free. Cronus stood tallest among them, sickle still in hand, and claimed the throne of heaven. He freed his siblings, and together they began to rule. It was called the Golden Age, a time when the world was softer, when mortals, newly made, lived without war or sorrow, when harvests came easily and death was gentle. And Cronus, now king, looked upon his sister Rhea. She was beautiful in the way mountains are beautiful, in the way rivers are beautiful, solid and eternal and calm. He had always admired her, loved her even, in whatever way Titans loved, and so he asked her to be his queen, his consort, his wife. In those days, marriage among gods was not a matter of romance, but of alliance, of continuation. Brother married sister, Titan married Titan, and the world turned on. Rhea accepted. Perhaps she loved him too. Perhaps she simply understood that this was how things were meant to be. Cronus was king. She would be queen. Together they would bring forth the next generation, children who would inherit the cosmos and carry it forward into ages yet unborn. For a time it was good. Cronus ruled with the weight of prophecy on his shoulders, but he ruled well. The earth was green, the sky was clear, the Titans, once imprisoned, now walked freely, each claiming their domain. And Rhea stood beside her husband, steady as ever, the eternal flow of time and generation made manifest. But prophecy, like blood, has a way of seeping through even the tightest grip. Uranus, in his final moments, in his agony and rage, had cursed his son. He had whispered it through torn breath and clenched teeth. You will be overthrown, just as I was. One of your own children will rise against you. You will lose everything, just as I did. And Cronus, who had wielded the sickle, who had struck down his own father, knew the curse was true. So he made a decision, a terrible one, a decision that would twist the Golden Age into something darker, something Rhea would carry in her heart for the rest of eternity. He would not be overthrown, he would not fall, he would do what his father had failed to do. He would destroy his children before they could destroy him. Rhea's first pregnancy was a thing of wonder. She was the Titaness of motherhood, of fertility, of the eternal flow of life, and now she carried that life within her. She could feel the child growing, could sense the divine spark that flickered like a star in her womb. She imagined holding it, raising it, teaching it the ways of the world. She imagined a future, but Cronus had other plans. When Hestia was born, small and perfect and glowing with gentle warmth, Rhea held her for only a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of her, just long enough to see her daughter's eyes open, dark and curious and alive. And then Cronus took her. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. He simply opened his mouth, vast and dark as the void before creation, and swallowed his daughter whole. Rhea screamed, not the scream of pain, though there was pain, the scream of a mother watching her child vanish, the scream of someone who has just learned that love, no matter how deep, cannot always protect what it loves. Cronus closed his mouth. He swallowed, and Hestia was gone, trapped, alive, but imprisoned in the belly of her father, in a darkness that would stretch on for years. Rhea begged him to stop, to reconsider. She reminded him of the Golden Age, of the peace they had built, of the promise of children who would carry their legacy forward. But Cronus's fear was stronger than his love. The prophecy haunted him. Every time he looked at Rhea, he saw not his wife, but the vessel of his doom. And so, when she bore their second child, he did it again. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, of golden grain and green fields, was swallowed the moment she drew breath. Then Hera, proud and beautiful even as an infant, vanished into the dark. Then Hades, quiet and solemn, who did not cry as he was taken. Then Poseidon, wild and storm-eyed, who kicked and thrashed but could not escape. One by one Rhea gave birth. One by one her children were stolen. One by one the world she had imagined crumbled. She became hollow, not empty, for the children still lived inside Cronus, still grew in that strange, suspended way divine beings grow even in captivity, but hollow in the way a person becomes hollow when the thing they were made for is taken from them again and again. Cronus tried to comfort her, in his way. He brought her gifts. He invited her to feasts. He assured her that this was necessary, that he was protecting them all, that one day she would understand. But Rhea did not understand. She only grieved. And in her grief, something changed. She'd been gentle, patient, the goddess of ease and comfort, of steady flow and eternal return. But now, carrying her sixth child, she felt something harder take root. Not rage, exactly. Cunning. The cold, clear resolve of someone who has lost everything and refuses to lose one more thing. She went to Gaia, her mother, who had once plotted against Uranus. She went in secret in the dark of the moon and she asked, "How do I save this child?" Gaia, who had carried Titans in her womb and felt them shoved back inside, who knew the weight of rebellion and the cost of defiance, told her. "Go to Crete," she said. "Give birth there, in the caves of Mount Ida. Hide the child, and give Cronus something else to swallow." So Rhea did. The journey to Crete was long. Rhea travelled in secret, telling Cronus she needed to visit the sacred groves, to pray to the old spirits for guidance. He believed her, why wouldn't he? She had never defied him. She had grieved, yes, but she had always obeyed. This time would be different. The island of Crete rose from the sea like a promise. Its mountains were steep and wild, covered in cypress and oak, and deep within Mount Ida there was a cave. Not a cave made by water or wind, but something older, a hollow in the world itself, dark and cool and secret. It was there, surrounded by stone and shadow, that Rhea gave birth to her sixth child, Zeus. He came into the world screaming, as all babies do, divine or otherwise. His cries echoed off the cave walls, loud and insistent and entirely too dangerous. If Cronus heard them, if anyone loyal to Cronus heard them, the plan would fail. But Rhea was prepared. She had called upon the Curettes, the wild young gods of the mountainside, spirits of storm and stone and dancing fury. They surrounded the cave, armed with bronze shields and spears, and they began to dance. They clashed their weapons together in a rhythm that shook the earth, a thunderous noise that drowned out every other sound. Zeus's cries were swallowed by the clanging. The mountain rang with it, and in the valley below, in the palaces of the Titans, no one heard a thing. Rhea held her son. For the first time in years, she held one of her children and did not have to let go. She memorized his face, the way his tiny fists curled, the way his eyes, already sharp and intelligent, seemed to see more than an infant should. And then she handed him to the nymphs who would raise him. A goat named Amalthea would nurse him, offering divine milk that would make him strong. Nymphs called the Melissae would feed him honey, sweet and golden, gathered from the sacred bees of the mountain. And the Curettes would guard him, dancing their shield-clashing dance whenever he cried, keeping him hidden from the world. Rhea could not stay. To stay would draw suspicion, so she kissed her son's forehead, whispered promises she hoped she could keep, and turned away. Then she picked up a stone. Not just any stone, a smooth, heavy rock from the cave floor, roughly the size and weight of a newborn god. She wrapped it in swaddling clothes, soft white cloth that smelled of milk and birth. She held it the way a mother holds a child, careful and tender, and she returned to Cronus. He was waiting for her, as she knew he would be. His eyes were dark with the same old fear, the same old hunger to survive at any cost. "Is it done?" he asked. Rhea handed him the bundle. Cronus didn't look. Why would he? 5 times before she had handed him a child. 5 times before he had done what needed to be done. This was the 6th, the last. After this, the prophecy could not touch him. He opened his mouth. He swallowed. The stone went down like all the others, heavy and cold and wrong in ways he didn't notice because fear makes you careless. He swallowed, and he was satisfied. And somewhere on Crete, in a cave deep in the mountain, a baby who would one day become king of the gods drew his first breaths in freedom. Rhea did not smile. Not yet, but something in her, something that had been broken, began, very slowly, to mend. Zeus grew up in secret in the wild places of Crete where gods and nymphs and spirits danced beneath the trees. He was raised by Amalthea, who let him drink from her udder, milk so rich and divine it made him stronger than any Titan child had ever been. He was fed by the Melissae, nymphs who gathered honey from sacred bees and dripped it onto his tongue. He was guarded by the Curetes, who danced and clanged their shields whenever he cried, who taught him the rhythms of war and the songs of the mountain. And every so often, in the dead of night when the moon was dark, Rhea came to visit. She couldn't come often. Cronus watched her now, more carefully than before, as if some part of him suspected but couldn't quite believe. So her visits were brief. She would slip into the cave, hold her son, whisper stories of his siblings trapped inside their father's belly, tell him that one day he would free them. Zeus listened. Even as a child, even before he could speak, he listened with an intensity that unnerved the nymphs. He was not like other children. He did not laugh easily. He did not play. He watched. He learned. And he waited. As he grew, so did his power. Lightning flickered at his fingertips when he was angry. Thunder rumbled in his chest when he shouted. The sky above Crete seemed to respond to him, clouds gathering when he was sad, parting when he smiled. The Curetes trained him in combat, teaching him to wield spear and shield, to move with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a warrior. The nymphs taught him the songs of the earth, the language of wind and water, the way to cool storms and calm seas, and Rhea, whenever she could, taught him what it meant to be a god who cared. She told him about Hestia's warmth, Demeter's patience, Hera's pride, Hades' quiet strength, Poseidon's wildness. She painted pictures of his siblings with words, so that when he finally met them, they would not be strangers. She also told him about Cronus, about the fear that had twisted him, about the prophecy that had poisoned everything, about the golden age that had turned to ash the moment a father chose survival over love. Zeus absorbed it all, and slowly, year by year, he made a choice. He would not let his siblings remain imprisoned. He would not let his father's fear define the cosmos. He would rise, he would fight, and he would win. When he was grown, tall and broad-shouldered and crackling with barely contained power, he left the cave for the first time. The Curetes and nymphs tried to stop him. "You're not ready," they said. "Cronus is too strong. The Titans will destroy you." But Zeus had been ready for years. He descended from Mount Ida, walked through the forests of Crete, and made his way to the palace of the Titans. He did not announce himself. He did not challenge Cronus openly. Instead, with the help of Gaia and Rhea, he took on the guise of a cupbearer, a servant who poured wine and brought food to the Titan king's table. Cronus did not recognize him. Why would he? The last time he had seen this child, it had been a stone wrapped in cloth. Zeus served him wine. But in the wine, mixed with honey and bitter herbs, was a potion brewed by Gaia herself. A potion designed to do one thing: make Cronus vomit. The Titan King drank deeply. He always did. The wine was sweet and he had no reason to suspect. And then his stomach began to churn. It started as discomfort, a tightness in his gut, then pain, sharp and twisting. He doubled over, gasping, and the court fell silent. Everyone watched as their king, the lord of the cosmos, the one who had overthrown Uranus himself, began to retch. First came the stone, the one Rhea had given him, wrapped in cloth, now filthy and worn. It hit the marble floor with a heavy thud. Then came Poseidon, grown now, wild-eyed and furious, spilling onto the floor in a rush of sea-water and rage. Then Hades, silent and pale, his eyes adjusting to light after years of darkness. Then Hera, proud even in her confusion, pulling herself upright with the grace of someone who refuses to be diminished. Then Demeter, blinking and gentle, seeds already sprouting in her hair. And finally Hestia, the eldest, the first swallowed, the last freed, stepping forward with quiet dignity. They stood together, the 6 children of Cronus and Rhea, reunited at last. Cronus stared at them, at the stone, at Zeus, who had dropped his disguise and now stood tall, lightning crackling around his fists. And he understood. The prophecy was here. The overthrow had begun. The war that followed was called the Titanomachy. It lasted 10 years and it shook the roots of the world. Cronus rallied the other Titans to his side. Oceanus, Creus, Iapetus and the others, all those who had once been imprisoned by Uranus and freed by Cronus, now fought to keep him on his throne. They made their stronghold on Mount Othrys, and from there they waged war against the children who dared to rebel. Zeus and his siblings claimed Mount Olympus. It was higher, colder, closer to the stars. From there they struck at the Titans with fury and cunning. Poseidon summoned tidal waves. Hades slipped unseen through the shadows. Hera coordinated their strategies with ruthless precision. Demeter blessed the earth to provide them with food, and Hestia kept the sacred fire burning, a beacon of hope even in the darkest moments. But they were 6 against 12, and for a long time, neither side could win. Rhea watched the war from a distance. She did not fight. She could not bring herself to raise a weapon against Cronus, even after everything he had done. But she did not fight for him either. She simply waited, tending to the wounded, offering quiet counsel to her children when they came to her in exhaustion. She had set this all in motion. She had saved Zeus. She had orchestrated the freeing of her other children. And now she had to live with the consequences. The war dragged on. Mountains crumbled, rivers ran dry. The sky itself seemed to fracture under the weight of so much divine fury. And then Zeus, ever the tactician, made a choice that would turn the tide. He descended into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, and freed the prisoners his grandfather Uranus had locked away. The Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths of terrible skill, and the Hecatonchires, 100-handed giants of impossible strength. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged weapons for the Olympians. For Zeus, a thunderbolt that could split the sky. For Poseidon, a trident that could shake the sea. For Hades, a helm of darkness that made him invisible, even to gods. Armed with these, the Olympians pressed their advantage. Zeus hurled lightning that carved valleys into mountains. Poseidon summoned storms that drowned entire battlefields. Hades moved unseen, sowing terror wherever he went. And slowly, inevitably, the Titans began to fall. Cronus fought to the last. He wielded his old sickle, the one he had used to castrate his father, and he swung it with the desperation of someone who knows they have already lost. But Zeus was stronger. Zeus was faster. Zeus had the weight of prophecy on his side. With one final strike, one blinding flash of lightning, Zeus brought his father down. The war ended. The Titans were bound in chains and cast into Tartarus, locked away in the same dark pit where the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires had once languished. Cronus, once king of the cosmos, was imprisoned with the rest. Only a few were spared. Themis, who had remained neutral, was allowed to walk free. Prometheus, who had aided Zeus, was honored, and Rhea, mother of the victors, grandmother of the new age, was welcomed to Olympus with open arms. She stood on the peak of that great mountain and looked out over the world her children now ruled. Zeus sat on the throne. Poseidon claimed the sea. Hades descended to the underworld. Hera prepared to be queen. Demeter blessed the fields. Hestia tended the hearth. And Rhea, who had once been queen of heaven, stepped quietly aside. She did not need a throne. She had done what she was meant to do. Her children were free. The prophecy was fulfilled. And the world, scarred and weary, began to heal. Life on Olympus was different from life under Cronus. Where the Titans had ruled with vast impersonal power, the Olympians were loud and bright and endlessly dramatic. They held feasts that lasted for days. They argued over petty slights. They fell in love with mortals and each other, tangled in affairs that would spawn legends. Rhea moved through it all like a ghost, not invisible, but quiet. She attended the gatherings when invited, sat at the edges of the great hall, smiled at the antics of her grandchildren. Because by now, there were grandchildren. Zeus had wasted no time in producing heirs. Athena, born from his head, wise and armoured. Apollo and Artemis, twins born to Leto, radiant and deadly. Hermes, quick-witted and silver-tongued. Ares, loud and brutal. Hephaestus, brilliant and lame. Aphrodite, though technically not his daughter, was welcomed into the family. Dionysus, born of mortal woman and divine madness, came later. And Rhea loved them all. She had been denied the chance to raise her own children, but her grandchildren were another matter. She doted on them, told them stories, offered them comfort when their parents were too busy or too angry. She was the grandmother every child dreams of, patient, kind, always ready with a soft word or a warm embrace. But her most important role came not in the feasts or the halls of Olympus, but in the moments of crisis, when even gods needed a mother's touch. The first time was when Leto went into labor with Apollo and Artemis. Leto had been one of Zeus's lovers, a Titaness of gentle demeanor who had caught his eye and carried his children. But Hera, Zeus's wife, was not known for her tolerance of such things. When she learned of the pregnancy, she flew into a rage. She forbade Leto from giving birth on any land under the sun. She ordered Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to stay away, ensuring Leto would suffer. Leto wandered the world, heavy with twins, contractions tearing through her and nowhere to rest. Every island, every shore turned her away, terrified of Hera's wrath. Finally, she came to the island of Delos, a barren rock that floated freely in the sea and was not technically land. There she collapsed, and the birth began. It was agony. Without Eileithyia to ease the pain, without any of the Olympian goddesses to help, Leto screamed for days. The labor stretched on, impossible and cruel. But Rhea heard. She left Olympus and came to Delos. She brought with her Tethys, her sister, and Thea, and together they surrounded Leto. Rhea, goddess of motherhood, placed her hands on Leto's belly and whispered the old words, the ones that ease pain and open the way. And slowly, finally, the twins were born. First Artemis, who arrived quickly and immediately began to help her mother. Then Apollo, radiant even as an infant, glowing with the light of the sun he would one day carry. Rhea washed them both in pure water, wrapped them in white cloth, and handed them to their mother. And Leto, weeping with relief and gratitude, named Rhea as one of the honored witnesses of the birth. Hera, when she learned of it, was furious. But even she did not dare rebuke Rhea. There were lines even the queen of Olympus would not cross. Years later, when Dionysus was born, Rhea stepped in again. Dionysus was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. The pregnancy had been complicated from the start. Hera, in her jealousy, had tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal his true form. And when he did, when the full power of the god of thunder was unleashed, Semele burned to ash. Zeus saved the unborn child, sewing him into his own thigh to finish the gestation. And when Dionysus was finally born, he was handed to nymphs to raise. But Hera was not finished. She sent madness to the infant god, a creeping insanity that twisted his mind and sent him wandering aimlessly across the world. He raged and wept and saw things that were not there. Zeus, desperate, brought the child to Rhea. She took him into her arms, this wild, broken grandson, and she held him until he stopped shaking. She sang to him the old songs, the ones she had sung to her own children when they were small. She bathed him in sacred water and anointed him with oils that smelled of mountain pine and wild thyme. And slowly, gently, she healed him. The madness did not leave entirely. It never would. Dionysus would always carry a touch of wildness, a hint of chaos. But Rhea gave him control. She taught him to channel it, to turn madness into ecstasy, into the frenzied joy of wine and celebration. She also gave him a gift, an amethyst, a purple stone said to prevent drunkenness, a way to remain clear-headed even when the world spun with wine and music. Dionysus never forgot what she had done for him, and in the centuries to come, his followers would honor Rhea alongside him, their worship loud and ecstatic, drums and cymbals, clashing in rhythms that echoed the shield clashing of the curettes. Then there was the matter of Persephone. Demeter, Rhea's daughter, had a daughter of her own. Persephone, beautiful and innocent, beloved by her mother, in the way only a first child can be beloved. Demeter doted on her, protected her, kept her close, perhaps too close, unwilling to let her grow or wander far. And then Hades, Rhea's son, fell in love with her. It was not the soft, gentle love of poets. Hades did not woo or court. He was the god of the underworld, lord of the dead, and he took what he wanted. With Zeus's permission, he opened the earth and dragged Persephone down into the dark. Demeter did not know where her daughter had gone. She only knew that one moment Persephone had been picking flowers in a meadow, and the next she was gone. Demeter's grief was absolute. She abandoned Olympus. She wandered the earth, searching, calling her daughter's name, and in her sorrow she withheld her blessings from the world. Crops withered, fields turned barren, famine spread like a shadow, and mortals began to starve. Zeus, watching the world die, grew concerned. He sent messenger after messenger to Demeter, begging her to return to let the earth bloom again. But she refused. not until Persephone was returned. So Zeus sent Rhea. Rhea found her daughter in the city of Eleusis, disguised as an old woman, sitting at a well and weeping. She approached gently, the way one approaches a wounded animal, and she sat beside her. Demeter did not recognize her mother at first, but Rhea spoke softly, and eventually Demeter looked up and saw who it was. "Mother," she said, and her voice broke. Rhea held her. She did not tell her that everything would be fine, because it wouldn't. Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds in the underworld. She was bound there now, tied to Hades by an ancient law. She could not return fully. But Rhea explained the compromise Zeus had arranged. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld with Hades, and part of the year on Olympus with Demeter. The earth would bloom when she returned, and wither when she left. It was not perfect. It was not fair, but it was the best that could be done. And Demeter, because her mother asked, agreed to return to Olympus. The earth bloomed again, spring came, and with it hope. But every year, when Persephone descended to the underworld, Demeter grieved. And every year, Rhea sat with her, quiet and steady, a presence that said, "You are not alone in this." Rhea's worship was never grand. There were no great temples built in her honor, no festivals that shook cities with revelry. She was not like Zeus, whose shrines dotted every mountain, or Athena, whose statues stood in every agora. But she was worshipped, quietly, deeply. On Crete, where Zeus had been born and hidden, pilgrims came to the cave on Mount Ida. They brought offerings of milk and honey, left at the entrance where the Curettes had once danced. They prayed for safe childbirth, for healthy children, for the strength to endure the pain of motherhood. In Athens there was a temple called the Metroon, the house of the mother. It was dedicated to Rhea in her role as Metatheon, mother of the gods. People came there when they needed comfort, when they felt lost or afraid. They sat in the cool shade of the temple and felt the presence of something ancient and kind. Her priests and priestesses performed ecstatic rites, dancing to the beat of the tympanon, a wide handheld drum whose rhythm mimicked a heartbeat. They clashed cymbals and sang in high, wild voices, invoking the same energy the Curettes had brought to the cave on Crete. It was worship that felt less like prayer and more like a return to something primal, something that existed before words or names. Lions were sacred to her. In art, she was often depicted seated on a throne, flanked by two great cats, their golden eyes watchful and calm. The lion represented strength, yes, but also the fierce protectiveness of a mother. A lioness will fight to the death for her cubs. So too had Rhea fought in her own way for hers. Oak trees were her symbol as well. Sturdy, deep-rooted, providing shelter and shade. Rhea was not flashy. She was not the kind of goddess who demanded attention or threw lightning when displeased. She was the oak tree in the storm, steady, strong, enduring. And gradually, over centuries, her worship blended with that of Cybele, the Phrygian mother goddess from Asia Minor. Cybele was wild and strange, born androgynous, associated with castration and madness and orgiastic rites that made even Greeks uncomfortable. But she was also a mother goddess, a protector, and the similarities were too strong to ignore. By the classical era, Rhea and Cybele were often spoken of as one. The Greeks called her Rhea Cybele, and her worship carried elements of both, the gentle comfort of Rhea, the wild ecstasy of Cybele. In Rome, she became Magna Mater, the Great Mother, and her cult was brought from Asia Minor with great ceremony. The Romans honoured her with festivals that lasted days, processions of priests and priestesses singing hymns and beating drums. But beneath all the names, all the rituals, the core remained the same. A goddess of motherhood, a goddess who protected children, a goddess who endured. There is a darker story whispered in the Orphic mysteries that few like to tell. In this version, Zeus, once grown and powerful, looked upon his mother with desire. He pursued her, filled with the kind of divine lust that recognizes no boundaries. Rhea refused him. She was his mother, and even among gods there are lines. To escape him, she transformed into a serpent, sleek and quick, and fled through the forests. But Zeus transformed as well, taking the form of a great serpent, and he caught her. The union was brief and violent, and from it a daughter was born, Persephone. But this, Persephone, was not the gentle maiden Demeter would raise. She was born deformed, monstrous, with too many eyes and horns sprouting from her head. Rhea, horrified, fled from her own child, refused to nurse her, and after that, Rhea ceased to be. She transformed, became Demeter, and the memories of what Zeus had done faded like dreams. It is an uncomfortable story, one that modern readers often dismiss as an aberration, a strange offshoot of mythology that doesn't fit the more familiar narratives. But it lingers. It suggests that even in the stories of gods there is trauma. There are things too painful to speak plainly. There are transformations born not of choice but of necessity. Whether this story is true or whether it is simply a symbolic attempt to explain why Rhea fades from prominence after the birth of the Olympians is impossible to say. Myths shift like water, taking different shapes depending on who tells them. But this much is certain. After the age of the Olympians began, Rhea withdrew. She stepped back from the center of the story. She became a supporting figure, a gentle presence in the background, a grandmother who offered comfort but no longer claimed the throne. Perhaps it was a choice. Perhaps it was simply that her role was done. She had brought forth the gods. She had saved Zeus. She had shepherded the world from one age to the next. And now, it was time to rest. In the end, Rhea's legacy is not one of battles or great deeds. She never hurled lightning or ruled kingdoms or slayed monsters. She is not remembered the way Zeus is, or Athena, or even Hera. But she is remembered. She is the mother who refused to give up, the woman who wrapped a stone in cloth and fooled a tyrant, the goddess who hid her son in a mountain cave and trusted that one day he would set the world right. She is the grandmother who attended births when others refused, who healed broken minds, who sat with grieving daughters and offered no easy answers, only presence. She is the goddess of flow, of ease, of the eternal turning of generations. She is the comfort you feel when someone holds you and says nothing, because there are no words, only warmth. The Homeric poets had a phrase they used often, the gods who live at their ease. In Greek, the word for ease was Rhea. Every time they spoke of divine comfort, of the leisurely blessed life of the gods, they were invoking her. Whether they knew it or not, her name was woven into the very fabric of Olympus. She was the flow of time, the turning of seasons, the unending cycle of birth and death and rebirth. She was the mother before mothers had names, the archetype that would echo through every goddess who came after. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is everything. On Crete, even now, the cave on Mount Ida remains. Pilgrims still come, leaving offerings at its entrance. They say that if you stand very still, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint echo of shields, clashing, of warriors dancing to drown out an infant's cries. And sometimes, in the quiet between the echoes, you can hear something else. A mother's lullaby, soft and low, sung in a language older than Greek, older than Titans, older than words. Rhea's lullaby, still echoing through the ages, still offering comfort to those who need it. And that is how she endures. Not in temples or statues or grand epics, but in every mother who defies a tyrant to protect her child. In every grandmother who sits with the grieving and says, "I am here," in every heart that chooses love over fear, even when the cost is unbearable. She is the goddess of ease, and ease in a world of chaos and war and endless striving is no small gift. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think of Rhea. Not Rhea the Titaness, not Rhea the Queen of Heaven, but Rhea the mother who refused to stop fighting even when everything seemed lost. Rhea who saved the world not with strength, but with cunning. Rhea who let her children claim the glory while she stood quietly in the background, content. The Titans are gone now, locked away in Tartarus. Cronus, who swallowed his children, is bound in chains. But Rhea remains, in the turning of seasons, in the comfort of home, in the quiet strength of mothers everywhere who carry the world on their shoulders and never ask for thanks. She was there at the beginning, when the earth was young and the sky pressed down like a weight, and she will be there at the end when the last story is told and the last star goes dark, steady, gentle, eternal, the mother of the gods. Sleep well. Additional content for Rhea script, part 2. Rhea learned early that she had a gift for nurturing. When the first plants began to grow, experimental attempts by Gaia to see what the earth could produce, Rhea tended them. She would sit for hours beside a single sprouting seed, watching it unfold its leaves, murmuring encouragement as if the plant could hear her. And perhaps it could. The plants she tended grew stronger, taller, healthier than those left alone. Her siblings noticed, of course. Themis, ever practical, suggested that Rhea could be put in charge of agriculture when mortals were eventually created. Mnemosyne recorded Rhea's techniques in her perfect memory, creating the first library of knowledge about cultivation. And Cronus watched, silent and thoughtful, in the way he watched everything. But those early days were not destined to last. Uranus, their father, watched his children from above, with growing unease. They were powerful, these Titans. Too powerful, perhaps. They moved with confidence, spoke with authority, gathered in groups to discuss ideas he couldn't quite hear. And every time he looked at them, he saw his own eventual obsolescence written in their eyes. The sky god had never been kind. He was distant by nature, cold and unchanging, more force than person. But now that distance curdled into something darker. Suspicion, fear, the gnawing certainty that what he had created would one day unmake him. So he made his choice. One by one, as the Titans slept or wandered or tended to their new world, Uranus descended. Not gently, not with the warning of thunder or the courtesy of conversation. He simply fell upon them like a collapsing sky, and with strength born of primordial terror, he shoved them back into the earth, back into Gaia, back into the womb from which they had emerged. Rhea was gathering wildflowers when it happened to her. She had found a meadow where strange blooms had appeared overnight, flowers with petals like flame and centers dark as night. She was kneeling, reaching for one, when the world above her went dark. Her father's hand, massive and cold as glacial ice, pressed down on her shoulders. She tried to cry out, tried to struggle, but It was useless. Divine though she was young, and Uranus was the sky itself. Weight without limit, pressure without end. The earth opened beneath her, not like a mouth, but like a wound. And she fell into it, down into darkness that pressed against her from all sides, suffocating and complete. She could hear her siblings around her in the dark, Themis shouting in outrage, demanding to know by what law this could be allowed. Oceanus trying to summon water to flood their prison but finding none. Tethys weeping, Hyperion trying desperately to create light and failing, and above them, barely audible through layers of stone and soil, Gaia's voice. Their mother screaming. Time in the darkness was strange. It might have been days or years or centuries. There was no way to measure it, no change to mark the passing of moments. Rhea tried to move and found she couldn't. The pressure was too great. She tried to breathe and found that she was breathing somehow, but it hurt, every inhalation scraping against her ribs like broken glass. She learned what it meant to be trapped. To be held in place by a will greater than her own, to be nothing more than a piece of the earth, inert and silent and forgotten. But she also learned patience, because unlike some of her siblings who raged against their imprisonment, Rhea understood something fundamental. This would not last forever. Nothing did. Everything flowed, everything changed, and eventually the pressure would ease and they would be free again. She just had to wait, and she was very, very good at waiting. Gaia could not endure it. Every moment with her children re-imprisoned inside her was agony, not just physical, but emotional. She had birthed them into freedom, into sunlight and air and the endless possibilities of existence. To have them torn away and stuffed back into the dark was a violation so profound, it broke something in her. So she planned. In the deep places of the earth, in the spaces where even Uranus could not hear, she forged a weapon, a sickle grey and sharp as regret, made from flint and rage and the determination of a mother who has lost too much. She called to her children in the darkness. Her voice travelled through stone and roots, through the secret paths that connected all earth to earth herself, and one by one she asked them, "Who will free us? Who will stand against your father? Who has the courage to commit patricide?" Silence answered her, or perhaps not quite silence, but hesitation, which is silence's cousin. The Titans were young still, new to existence, and the idea of killing the sky itself seemed impossible. All except Cronus, the youngest, the last-born, the one who had watched everything and said little. His voice came back to Gaia through the stone, quiet and certain. "I will." She gave him the sickle, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say she made it available to him. Let him reach through the prison of earth and grasp its handle. And Cronus held it and waited. When Uranus descended again to press himself against Gaia in that ancient automatic union, Cronus was ready. He did not hesitate, did not pause to consider the horror of what he was about to do. He simply swung the blade in a wide, perfect arc and severed his father's genitals with a single stroke. The blood that fell was dark and thick and wrong. Where it hit the earth, strange things grew. The Erinyes, the Furies, born from paternal blood and guilt, would spend eternity punishing crimes against family. The giants, massive and violent, would one day rise to wage war against the gods. The Meliae, ash-tree nymphs, would witness battles and mourn the spears carved from their sisters' wood. And where the severed flesh fell into the sea, foam began to gather. White and luminous, it swirled and condensed, and from it rose Aphrodite, fully grown and radiant, goddess of love and beauty born from an act of ultimate violence. But all of that was secondary to the most important thing. Uranus retreated. Wounded and howling, he pulled back into the sky and refused to descend again. He was finished. His age was over, and the Titans were free. Rhea emerged from the earth gasping. She had forgotten what air felt like, what light looked like. For a moment she couldn't stand, couldn't do anything but kneel on the grass and breathe and remember that she had a body that could move, could feel, could exist outside of endless pressure. Around her, her siblings were doing the same. Some were celebrating. Oceanus was laughing, a great booming sound that made the rivers swell. Hyperion was weeping with joy, light streaming from his eyes. Themis was already drafting the first laws, ensuring this could never happen again. But Rhea just sat quietly, letting the sun warm her face, feeling the way air moved in and out of her lungs. And when she finally looked up, she saw Cronus standing apart from the others, the bloody sickle still in his hand, staring at the sky with an expression she couldn't quite read. It might have been satisfaction. It might have been triumph. Or it might have been fear, because Cronus had just learned something terrible and fundamental. Children can kill their parents. The young can overthrow the old. Power, once seized, can be seized again. And that knowledge would shape everything that followed. The Golden Age began quietly. There was no coronation, no ceremony. Cronus simply stood taller than the other Titans, and they accepted it. He had freed them. He had struck down Uranus. Leadership was his by right of deed. He gathered the Titans together and made his first proclamation. They would rule together, each taking charge of a different aspect of the cosmos. Oceanus would manage the rivers and seas. Hyperion would regulate the light. Themis would establish laws. Mnemosyne would keep records, and so on, each finding their place, each contributing to the order of the new world. And then Cronus looked at Rhea. She had not asked for any particular role. She was content to tend the plants, to nurture the small things, to exist without title or territory. But Cronus saw something in her. Perhaps it was her steadiness. Perhaps it was the way she had endured imprisonment without breaking. Perhaps it was simply that she was beautiful in a way that made him forget, temporarily, about the weight of leadership and the burden of prophecy. He approached her one evening as she sat by a stream, trailing her fingers in the water. "Rhea," he said. She looked up. His shadow fell across her, blocking the last light of the setting sun. "I need a queen," he continued, "someone to stand beside me, someone to help shape this new age." Rhea considered this. She was not unaware of what marriage meant, not ignorant of the expectations that came with being consort to a king. But she also understood that in those early days, partnerships were about survival and continuation. The Titans needed to produce the next generation. Someone had to birth the future. And Cronus, despite the blood on his hands, despite the calculating gleam in his eye, was still her brother. Still family, still one of the 12 who had been imprisoned together and freed together. "Yes," she said simply, and that was that. The wedding, if it could be called that, was a simple affair. The other Titans gathered. Gaia blessed the union. Oceanus made the rivers run sweet with wine. Themis declared the match lawful, and Rhea and Cronus stood together before their siblings and promised to rule, to create, to continue. The early years of their marriage were, by most accounts, good. Cronus was attentive in his way. He consulted Rhea on matters of governance. He listened when she spoke. He brought her gifts, strange and beautiful things, jewels that had formed in the deep earth, flowers that bloomed only at night, a crown made from woven starlight. And Rhea, for her part, was content. She liked the rhythm of their life together, the way they would walk through the world at evening, discussing the state of things, the way he would sometimes rest his head in her lap and let her stroke his hair, a gesture of vulnerability he showed no one else, the way they would stand together on high mountains and look out over all they had built. She believed in those days that they would last forever, that the golden age was aptly named, that the future stretched ahead of them, bright and unending. She did not yet know about the prophecy. Cronus told her on the night she revealed her first pregnancy. They were in their palace, such as it was, more a hall of stone and starlight than anything as solid as later gods would build. Rhea had been feeling strange for weeks, a warmth in her belly, a sense of something growing. She recognized it instinctively. Life was forming inside her, the first child of the new age. She found Cronus in the great hall staring at nothing. When she told him, his face went through a series of expressions too quick to pass. Joy, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like grief. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for her to sit beside him. When she did, he took her hand and his grip was too tight, almost painful. Before Uranus retreated, he said slowly, "He cursed me, used his last breath to ensure I would suffer as he suffered." Rhea's heart went cold. What did he say? That I would be overthrown by one of my own children, that one of them would rise against me just as I rose against him. That power would be taken from me just as I took it from him. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Rhea tried to laugh, to dismiss it as the bitter ranting of a defeated god. But something in Cronus's face stopped her. He believed it, utterly and completely. The prophecy had burrowed into him like a worm, eating away at everything else. "We can prevent it," she said, trying to sound confident. "We'll raise our children well, teach them loyalty, show them that we are good rulers, that there's no need for rebellion." Cronus looked at her with something like pity. "My father thought the same," he said, "and look where that got him. Then what do you want to do?" His next words were quiet, so quiet she almost didn't hear them. "I want to survive." And in that moment, Rhea knew. She didn't know the specifics yet, didn't know the horror that awaited her, but she knew that the man beside her, the one she had married, the one she had thought she understood, was about to do something terrible. And she was right. Hestia's birth was the hardest. Not physically, though that was difficult enough. Divine births were not like mortal ones, where pain could be measured in hours. Rhea laboured for days, feeling the child within her push against the boundaries of flesh and divinity, trying to enter a world that wasn't quite ready for her. The other Titanesses helped. Tethys brought cool water. Themis stood guard at the door. Phoebe sang songs that were said to ease pain. And through it all, Rhea breathed and pushed and focused on the one thought that kept her going. Soon she would hold her daughter. Soon she would be a mother. When Hestia finally emerged, tiny and glowing with inner warmth, Rhea wept. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that. From joy. From overwhelming, impossible joy. This was her child. This small, perfect thing that fit in her arms and looked up at her with dark, serious eyes. She held her for perhaps 10 minutes, long enough to memorize the shape of her face, long enough to whisper promises about the life they would have together, the things she would teach her, the world they would explore. Then Cronus entered the room. He looked at Hestia with an expression that might have been longing, might have been regret. It was hard to say. His face had become difficult to read in the months since Rhea had told him about the prophecy. "No," Rhea said. It was the first word she had spoken since giving birth, and it came out as a whisper. "No, please." Cronus knelt beside her. For a moment she thought he would embrace her, would tell her he had changed his mind, that love was stronger than fear. Instead, he reached for Hestia. Rhea tried to pull away, but she was weak from labor, exhausted in ways that went beyond the physical. He took the baby from her arms easily, and Hestia, who had been so calm, began to cry. Additional content for Rhea's script, Part 3. Cronus opened his mouth. It was not a natural opening, not the way a person opens their mouth to speak or eat. It was something else, a widening that seemed to defy anatomy, as if the space inside him had no bottom, no end. Darkness poured from it, or perhaps the darkness was already there and simply became visible. And then he placed Hestia, still crying, still warm from her mother's arms, into that darkness. He swallowed. The sound of it was terrible, wet and final, and then it was done. Hestia was gone. Not dead, Rhea could still sense her, could still feel that tiny spark of divine life, but trapped, imprisoned in the belly of her own father. Rhea's scream started somewhere deep in her chest and tore its way out. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of the earth splitting, of mountains collapsing, of every mother who has ever lost a child condensed into a single moment of absolute agony. Cronus left the room. He couldn't look at her, couldn't face what he had just done, and Rhea lay in the aftermath of birth, bleeding and broken, and understood that this was only the beginning. The second pregnancy was lonelier. Rhea carried Demeter for the same number of months as she had carried Hestia, but this time she told no one. She hid the signs, wore loose clothing, avoided her siblings. She couldn't bear their pity, couldn't stand the way they looked at her now, like she was something wounded and helpless. Even Cronus seemed eager to pretend nothing had happened. He went about his duties as king, managing the cosmos, settling disputes among the Titans. He was kind to Rhea. When he saw her, affectionate even. As if by ignoring what he had done, he could make it not real. But Rhea remembered. Every moment of every day she remembered the weight of Hestia in her arms and the terrible emptiness that followed. Demeter was born in the middle of the night. Rhea had gone to a grove of oak trees, far from the palace, hoping that maybe if she was alone, if Cronus didn't know immediately, she could somehow keep this child. She could run. She could hide. She could find a way to protect her daughter. But Cronus knew. Perhaps he had been watching her. Perhaps he simply felt it, the way gods feel disturbances in the cosmic order. Because he appeared in the grove moments after Demeter's first cry. This one was different. Demeter had come out with seeds in her hair, tiny sprouts already pushing through. She smelled of fresh-turned soil and new rain. She was the promise of every harvest, every spring, every moment of growth and abundance made flesh. And Cronus swallowed her just as he had swallowed Hestia. This time Rhea didn't scream. She had no screams left. She simply sat beneath the oak tree and stared at the place where her daughter had been and felt something inside her die. For the third child, Rhea tried bargaining. When Hera was born, beautiful and imperious even as an infant, her tiny face set in an expression of dignified outrage, Rhea held her and made her case. "She has pride," Rhea said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "Look at her. She'll never challenge you. She'll respect authority. She'll be loyal." Cronus took Hera without a word, opened that terrible mouth, swallowed. And Rhea learned that there was no bargaining with fear. Fear doesn't listen to reason. It only knows one thing: survival, at any cost. With Hades, she tried anger. She held her fourth child, this small, quiet boy who had been born with ancient eyes, and she screamed at Cronus. She called him a coward, a tyrant. She told him he was worse than Uranus, worse than any of the monsters that had crawled from primordial chaos. She told him that his fear would be his undoing, that by trying to prevent the prophecy he was ensuring it would come true. He listened. He even seemed to agree. For a moment, she thought she had reached him. Then he took Hades and swallowed him anyway. By the time Poseidon was born, Rhea had gone numb. She had cried so many tears there were no tears left. She had raged until rage became exhausting. She had begged until the words tasted like ash in her mouth. So when Poseidon emerged, wild and storm-eyed, she simply held him for as long as she could. She memorized the feeling of his weight in her arms, the way his small chest rose and fell with breath. She whispered to him about the sea he would one day rule, the waves that would answer to his call, the depths that would be his kingdom. And then she handed him to Cronus, herself. Better that than watch him be taken. Cronus swallowed Poseidon, and Rhea felt nothing, or rather she felt everything, so much that it looped back around to feeling like nothing. A numbness so complete it was almost peaceful. 5 children, 5 pregnancies, 5 births, 5 swallowings. And Rhea understood that if she had another child, the same thing would happen. Cronus would never change. His fear was absolute. It had become the defining feature of his existence, more fundamental than love, than duty, than anything else. So when she discovered she was pregnant for the 6th time, she made a decision. This child would not be swallowed. This child would live. And if that meant defying Cronus, if that meant deceiving him, if that meant starting a war that would shake the foundations of the cosmos, so be it. She was done being the gentle goddess, done being patient, done being the steady, flowing, easy presence that everyone relied on. She was a mother, and mothers protect their children. The journey to Crete was more difficult than Rhea had anticipated. She was heavily pregnant, her 6th child pressing against her ribs, kicking with the kind of vigor that suggested this one would be trouble. She had told Cronus she was going on a pilgrimage, to pray to the old spirits for comfort. He had seemed relieved, actually. Glad that she was finding some way to cope with her grief. He had no idea she was running away from him. Gaia guided her. The earth itself seemed to open paths before her, make the journey easier. Mountains parted, rivers ran shallow enough to cross. And when Rhea finally reached Crete, exhausted and ready to give birth any moment, Gaia whispered to her, "The cave. Go to the cave on Mount Ida. That's where you'll be safe." The Dictaean cave was not large, but it was deep. Rhea stumbled into it and immediately felt protected, as if the mountain itself was embracing her. The air inside was cool and still, and there was a strange sense of anticipation, as if the cave knew something important was about to happen. The labor started almost immediately. Perhaps it was the relief of being hidden, of knowing she had actually managed to escape. Perhaps the baby sensed it was finally safe to emerge. Either way, the contractions began, powerful and insistent. Rhea had no one to help her this time. No Titanesses to bring water or sing songs. No attendants to wipe her brow. Just her and the cave and the pain that rolled through her in waves. She had done this 5 times before. She knew what to expect. But somehow, this birth was different. Harder. As if Zeus, even before he was born, was already defying expectations. The curettes arrived while she was in the worst of it. She had called to them, to these wild spirits of the mountain, and they had come. 9 of them, young and fierce, armed with bronze shields and spears. They surrounded the cave entrance, and when Zeus finally emerged, screaming with divine fury, they began their dance. The noise was extraordinary, spears striking shields in perfect rhythm, a thunder that echoed off the cave walls and out into the world. It was loud enough to drown out a god's birth cries, loud enough to shake the trees and send birds fleeing from their nests. And above it all, Rhea held her son. Zeus was different from her other children. She could feel it immediately. He was heavier, somehow, more solid. His eyes, when they opened, were not the confused, curious eyes of a newborn, but something sharper, older, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "You," she whispered to him, "you're the one who will set them free." Zeus didn't respond. He was hours old, but Rhea could have sworn he looked at her with understanding. The nymphs came forward then. They had been waiting in the deeper parts of the cave, respectful of the birth but ready to help. Adrasteia and Ida they were called, daughters of Melicius. They took Zeus gently from Rhea's arms, and she let them, because she knew what had to come next. She found the stone near the cave entrance. It was perfect, roughly the size and shape of an infant god, smooth enough to wrap in cloth, heavy enough to be convincing. She held it for a moment, getting used to the weight of it, imagining it was Zeus. Then she swaddled it carefully in the cloth she had brought. White wool, soft and clean, exactly what she would have used for the real baby. She wrapped it with the same care she had shown her other children, tucking the edges in, making sure it looked right. When she was done, she held the bundle to her chest, closed her eyes, and practiced her expression. Grief, resignation, the face of a mother who had given up hope. She had worn that face 5 times before. She knew it well. Then she began the journey back. Cronus was waiting for her when she returned to the palace. He had probably been waiting the entire time, pacing and anxious, knowing that his 6th child was being born somewhere beyond his sight. "Well?" he asked as soon as he saw her. Rhea held out the bundle without a word. His face did something complicated. Relief, mostly. The last child, the last threat. After this he could relax, could stop looking over his shoulder, could finally believe he was safe. He took the swaddled stone from her arms. Rhea watched his face carefully. If he looked too closely, if he unwrapped it, if he felt the weight and realized it was wrong, everything would be lost. Her heart beat so hard, she thought it might burst from her chest. But Cronus didn't look. He never looked. He simply opened that terrible mouth, the one that had swallowed 5 of her children, and without ceremony or hesitation, he swallowed the stone. It went down hard. Rhea saw him struggle with it, saw his throat work as he forced the large, unyielding object down. For a moment, she thought he might realize, might cough it back up, and demand to know what was going on. But he didn't. He swallowed, and it was done. And somewhere on Crete, in a cave deep in Mount Ida, Zeus drew breath and began to grow. Cronus looked at Rhea. "Are you satisfied now?" he asked, and there was something almost pleading in his voice, as if he wanted her to understand, to forgive him, to tell him he had done the right thing. Rhea looked at him and felt nothing but contempt. "Yes," she said, "I'm satisfied." It was the first lie she had ever told him, and it felt like freedom. Years passed. On Crete, hidden from the eyes of the Titans, Zeus grew. He drank from Amalthea, the divine goat whose milk made him stronger than any god had ever been. He ate honey gathered by the Melissae from sacred bees whose hives produced nectar that granted wisdom. He was guarded by the Curettes, who danced whenever he cried, who taught him to fight and to think strategically. And every so often, when the moon was dark and Cronus was distracted, Rhea came to visit. She couldn't come often. Once every few months maybe, and she could never stay long. But those brief visits were everything to her. She would hold Zeus, who grew larger each time she saw him, and tell him stories about his siblings. She told him about Hestia, who loved home and hearth, who would one day tend the sacred flames, about Demeter, who would make crops grow and seasons turn, about Hera, proud and fierce and loyal to those she loved, about Hades, quiet and solemn, who saw more than he said, about Poseidon, wild as the sea he would one day command. She told him what Cronus had done, what he continued to do, ruling from his throne, convinced he was safe, never suspecting that his doom was being raised in secret. And Zeus listened. He absorbed every word, stored every detail. Even as a child, he was planning, thinking ahead, preparing. When he was old enough to speak, he asked his mother, "When? When will you free them? When will you challenge him? When does it begin?" Rhea looked at her son, this small god who was already so much more than child, and said, "Soon, when you're ready, when you're strong enough, soon." And Zeus nodded, satisfied. He would wait. He was good at waiting, had learned it from his mother. But his waiting was not passive. He trained with the Curettes, mastering combat. He studied with the nymphs, learning the ways of the world. He practiced summoning storms, calling lightning, bending the sky to his will. He was preparing for war. And when he was finally ready, when he stood as tall as a mountain and crackled with barely contained power, he left Crete and went to find his father. The Titanomachy, when it finally came, was not a surprise. Not to anyone who had been paying attention. The tension had been building for years, a pressure that made the very air feel heavy. Everyone knew something was coming. They just didn't know when or how. Zeus's arrival at Cronus's court, disguised as a servant, was audacious. It was also the only way it could have worked. If he had come as himself, announced his identity and his intent, Cronus would have destroyed him immediately, or tried to. But as a cupbearer, anonymous and beneath notice, he could move freely. Rhea had helped arrange it. She had whispered to the right people, called in favors, ensured there was a position open in the kitchens. She had made sure Zeus knew the layout of the palace, where Cronus would be sitting, when he would be most vulnerable. She had also, with Gaia's help, prepared the potion. It was not complex as far as magical concoctions went. Emetic herbs, powerful and bitter, a touch of sacred water from the springs of Dodona, and a whisper of Gaia's own power, earth magic that could make even a god's body rebel against itself. Zeus mixed it into Cronus's wine himself. His hands were steady. He showed no fear, no hesitation. He'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. When Cronus drank, the effect was not immediate. He finished the cup, set it down, continued his conversation with the Titans gathered around him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his face went grey. The pain started in his stomach, a cramping that doubled him over. He gasped, clutched at his belly, and everyone in the hall went silent. They had never seen their king like this, vulnerable and hurting. And then he began to vomit. The stone came first, still wrapped in its burial cloth, now stained and worn. It hit the floor with a sound like thunder, and everyone stared at it in confusion. What was this? Why was Cronus vomiting stones? But the stone was only the beginning. Poseidon came next, spilling out in a rush of seawater and fury. He was full grown now, had aged inside his father's stomach in whatever strange way divine beings age. He stood up, dripping and disoriented, and looked around the hall with wild eyes. Then Hades, silent and pale, unfolding from the floor with an expression of profound disgust. He brushed himself off with as much dignity as he could muster and stepped aside to make room for the next. Hera emerged, her pride somehow intact despite the circumstances. She stood tall immediately, refusing to show weakness even in such an undignified moment. Demeter came out gentle as always, already brushing seeds from her hair, already thinking about the earth she had been denied. And finally, last swallowed and first freed, Hestia stepped forward. She looked around at her siblings, at the stone, at Cronus still bent over and retching, and she smiled. Not with malice, just with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had always known this day would come. They stood together, the 5 freed gods, and looked at their father. Cronus, still gasping, looked up at them, looked at Zeus, who had dropped his disguise and now stood revealed, lightning crackling around his fists. And he understood the prophecy. It had come true. You, Cronus breathed. You were supposed to be the stone. I am, Zeus said calmly. I am the stone that breaks your teeth, the weight you can't swallow. I am everything you feared, Father, and I am here to end your reign. Cronus tried to stand, tried to reach for his old sickle, the one that had overthrown Uranus, but he was weak from the vomiting, disoriented, and his children were already moving. Poseidon summoned water from nowhere, a wave that crashed through the hall. Hades melted into shadow, appearing behind Cronus with a blade drawn. Hera coordinated their movements with sharp commands. Demeter caused vines to erupt from the floor, tangling Cronus's feet. Hestia simply stood back and watched, her presence a reminder of everything he had taken. And Zeus, youngest and strongest, raised his hand and called the sky. Lightning answered, not a single bolt but a storm's worth, crackling and brilliant, illuminating the hall like daylight. It struck Cronus directly, not enough to kill. Gods can't be killed so easily, but enough to stun, to paralyze, to show him exactly how outmatched he was. The other titans in the hall scattered. Some fled immediately, running for Mount Othrys to gather forces. Others hesitated, uncertain whether to defend their king or switch allegiances. A few, like Themis and Prometheus, simply stepped aside, making it clear they would not interfere. And Rhea, watching from the shadows, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The war lasted 10 years after that. 10 years of brutal, grinding conflict. The Titans gathered on Mount Othrys, led by Cronus and his generals. The Olympians, as Zeus and his siblings came to be called, made their stronghold on Mount Olympus. Between them, the earth became a battlefield. Rhea did not fight. She could not bring herself to raise a weapon against Cronus, despite everything he had done. But she did not fight for him either. She simply watched and waited and tended to the wounded on both sides. She saw the tide turn when Zeus freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires from Tartarus, saw the gifts they forged, the thunderbolt, the trident, the helm of darkness, saw her children become legends. She saw mountains split and rivers run backwards, saw the sky itself seem to crack under the weight of so much divine fury. And she saw, finally, the moment when Zeus struck Cronus down with one final devastating bolt of lightning. Saw her husband, the king she had once loved, fall defeated. The remaining Titans surrendered shortly after. They were bound in chains of unbreakable adamantine and cast into Tartarus, to the very bottom of the underworld, where they would remain for eternity. All except a few, Themis was spared for her neutrality, Prometheus for his aid, Oceanus for remaining neutral, and Rhea, of course. Rhea was not just spared but honored. As the mother of the victors, she was welcomed to Olympus with open arms. Zeus himself came to her after it was all over. He found her sitting alone on a hillside, looking out over the scarred landscape. "Mother," he said, and his voice was gentle. "It's finished. You're free now. We all are." Rhea looked at him. This son she had saved, who had grown into everything she'd hoped for and feared. This god who had just overthrown his father, fulfilling the same prophecy that had driven Cronus mad. "Are we?" she asked quietly. "Free? Or have we just started the cycle again?" Zeus didn't answer. He couldn't, because they both knew the truth. Prophecies don't end, they just repeat. And someday, perhaps, one of Zeus's own children would rise against him, just as he had risen against Cronus, just as Cronus had risen against Uranus. But that was a worry for another day. For now, the war was over. The old gods were imprisoned. The new gods stood victorious, and Rhea, mother of Olympus, followed her son up the mountain to begin the next age. Final expansion for Rhea script, Part 4, Life on Olympus. In those early days was chaotic. The Olympians were young gods, drunk on victory, eager to establish themselves as the new order. They threw themselves into ruling with an enthusiasm that sometimes bordered on recklessness. Zeus divided the cosmos among his brothers, giving Poseidon the seas and Hades the underworld, keeping the sky for himself. The sisters took on their own domains, Hestia the hearth, Demeter the harvest, Hera the role of queen, and Rhea watched them with a mixture of pride and concern. She was no longer Queen of Heaven. That title belonged to Hera now, though the transition was not without complications. Hera had not asked to be queen, had perhaps not even wanted it. But Zeus had chosen her as his wife and consort, and so the role fell to her. Rhea could have fought for her place, could have insisted that as the original queen of the Titans, as the mother of all these new gods, she deserved to remain on the throne. But she didn't. She had spent enough time in positions of power to know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step aside. So she did. She let Hera take her place, let the younger generation have their moment, and she retreated to the edges of Olympus, where she could watch and advise without interfering. It was a relief, in a way. She had been queen when every moment was fraught with fear, when every pregnancy ended in tragedy. The throne held too many painful memories. Better to let it go. Better to find a new role, and she did find one, though it took time. She became the grandmother of Olympus, the one the younger gods came to when they needed comfort or wisdom. The steady presence who had seen ages come and go and knew that most crises, no matter how dramatic they seemed in the moment, would eventually pass. Her first grandchildren were strange and wonderful. Athena, born fully grown from Zeus's head, came to Rhea often in those early days. Despite being born with all the knowledge of the world somehow already in her mind, Athena valued Rhea's perspective. The Titaness had a way of seeing through complications, of finding the simple truth beneath layers of complexity. They would walk together through the gardens of Olympus, Athena describing some strategic problem she was working through, Rhea listening and occasionally offering a gentle observation that would shift Athena's entire understanding. "You think too much like a warrior," Rhea told her once. "You see every situation as a battle to be won. Sometimes the best strategy is not to fight at all." Athena had considered this, then nodded slowly. "You sound like my father when he's not trying to impress anyone." Rhea had smiled at that. That's because I taught him. Before he learned to throw lightning and conquer kingdoms, he learned to think. And thinking, properly done, is always more powerful than force. The twins, Apollo and Artemis, were different. Where Athena came seeking wisdom, they came seeking stories. They would sit at Rhea's feet, these radiant godlings who had barely finished their own childhood, and demand tales of the old days. What were the Titans like, Apollo would ask. Were they as terrible as everyone says? And Rhea would shake her head. They were like anyone else, she would say. Some terrible, some kind, most somewhere in between. Your grandfather Oceanus was gentle for all his size. Your great-aunt Themis could be stern, but was always fair. Even Cronus was not always the tyrant he became. Fear made him cruel. Prophecy poisoned him. Remember that, both of you. Anyone can be twisted by fear. Artemis, more practical than her brother, would ask different questions. How did you survive all those years? How did you keep going when everything seemed lost? And Rhea would look at her, this fierce young goddess who was already so protective of the wild things, and say, I remembered that suffering is not forever. Nothing is forever. Everything flows. Everything changes. Even the worst pain eventually gives way to something else. The twins would leave these conversations thoughtful, carrying Rhea's words with them into their own adventures and challenges. Hermes was perhaps her favourite, though she would never say so aloud. The young god of tricks and travel and boundaries had an irrepressible energy that reminded her of Poseidon at that age. He would appear at her door at odd hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, full of questions or stories or half-formed schemes. Grandmother, he would say, because he insisted on calling her that. Despite Rhea telling him it made her feel ancient, I've discovered the most fascinating thing about boundaries. Did you know that every boundary is also a threshold? That the line between two things is actually its own space? And Rhea would listen, amused and engaged, as Hermes worked through whatever philosophical puzzle had seized his attention. She understood that what he really needed was not answers, but a safe audience. Someone who would let him think aloud without judgment. When he was done talking, she would offer him honey cakes and milk, the same thing she had once offered to Zeus when he was small and hidden on Crete. And Hermes would eat gratefully and thank her and dash off to his next adventure. But it was not all gentle conversations and pleasant visits. Rhea's role as grandmother sometimes demanded more active intervention, and nowhere was this more true than with Apollo's birth. Leto had been desperate when she came to Rhea. The Titaness was one of Rhea's own generation, younger sister to one of the male Titans, and she had made the mistake of catching Zeus's eye. The resulting pregnancy had sent Hera into one of her legendary rages. Hera had decreed that Leto could not give birth on any land under the sun. She had ordered Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, to stay away from Leto, ensuring that the birth would be as painful and difficult as possible. And she had sent word to every island and shore that anyone who helped Leto would face her wrath. So Leto wandered, growing heavier and more desperate, contractions starting and stopping, unable to find any place that would take her in. Rhea heard about it from one of the nymphs who kept her informed about such things. She found Leto on the shores of Delos, a floating island that was not technically land and therefore not subject to Hera's decree. The younger Titaness was in agony. The labour had been going on for days without resolution, pain rolling through her in endless waves. Her face was grey with exhaustion, her eyes hollowed by suffering. Rhea knelt beside her and took her hand. "I'm here," she said simply. The goddesses of Olympus had refused to come. Hera's anger was too frightening, her vengeance too certain. But Rhea was not afraid of Hera. Rhea had brought Hera into the world, had lost her to Cronus's stomach, had helped free her. Hera was her daughter, and Rhea loved her, but she would not let that love prevent her from doing what was right. She called on her sisters as well. Tethys and Thea arrived, and together the three Titanesses surrounded Leto. They sang the old songs, the ones that eased pain and opened the way. Rhea placed her hands on Leto's swollen belly and whispered words in a language older than Greek, words that spoke directly to the life within. And slowly, finally, the twins began to come. Artemis arrived first, slipping into the world with surprising ease once the way was opened. She was tiny and perfect, and within moments of being born, she turned to help with her brother's birth. Apollo took longer. He was larger, more reluctant to leave the safety of the womb. But with Artemis encouraging from outside and Rhea guiding from within, he too emerged. And when he did, the island of Delos was flooded with light, pure and golden. The light he would one day carry across the sky. Rhea washed both babies in sacred water, wrapped them in soft cloth, and placed them in their mother's arms. "Thank you," Leto whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." Rhea simply nodded. This was what she did. This was what she had always done. She eased pain. She helped life enter the world. She stood between suffering and relief. When Hera learned what Rhea had done, she was furious. But she said nothing. There were lines even the Queen of Olympus would not cross, and Rhea stood behind one of them. You could rage at your mother all you wanted, but you did not publicly rebuke her. Not when that mother had saved you from eternal imprisonment. Still, the tension between them was palpable. Hera resented Rhea's interference, saw it as undermining her authority, and Rhea, for her part, was disappointed in her daughter's cruelty. She had hoped that Hera, having suffered herself, would be kinder, but power and pain did not always lead to compassion. Sometimes they led to more pain, passed down the line. Dionysus presented a different kind of challenge. The god of wine and ecstasy was born under tragic circumstances. His mother, Semele, was a mortal princess who had asked to see Zeus in his true form. The request had been Hera's doing, of course. She had disguised herself and whispered suggestions into Semele's ear, knowing full well what would happen. When Zeus revealed himself, when the full power of the god of thunder was unleashed, Semele burned to ash. Zeus managed to save the unborn child, sewing him into his own thigh to finish the pregnancy. And when Dionysus was finally born months later from Zeus's body, he was given to the nymphs to raise. But Hera was not finished. She could not attack Zeus directly, but she could attack his offspring. She sent madness to Dionysus, a creeping insanity that seized the young god's mind and refused to let go. Dionysus wandered the world, not knowing where he was or who he was. He saw things that weren't there, heard voices that didn't exist. He was dangerous in his madness, powerful and unpredictable, capable of anything. Zeus, desperate and unsure what to do, brought him to Rhea. She took one look at her grandson, this wild-eyed young god who was shaking and muttering to himself, and knew exactly what needed to be done. She brought him to her grove, a quiet place far from the noise and chaos of Olympus. She sat him down beneath an old oak tree, the same kind of tree that had been sacred to her since before Olympus existed, and she simply held him. At first, Dionysus fought against the embrace. He was not used to being touched gently, was too lost in his madness to understand kindness. But Rhea held on, patient and steady, and gradually he began to calm. She sang to him, old songs, the ones she had sung to her own children when they were small, songs about flowing water and turning seasons, songs about comfort and ease, songs that reminded the listener that they were not alone, that someone cared, that everything would eventually be all right. Slowly, over days and then weeks, Dionysus began to return to himself. The madness didn't leave entirely. It never would. It was too deeply woven into who he was. But Rhea gave him control over it, taught him to channel it, to transform madness into ecstasy, into the wild joy of celebration rather than the terror of insanity. She also gave him a gift, a piece of amethyst, purple as wine, smooth and cool to the touch. It was said to prevent drunkenness, to keep the mind clear even when the senses were overwhelmed. Wear this, she told him. When the world spins too fast, when you feel yourself slipping, hold this stone and remember that you are more than your madness. Dionysus kept that stone for the rest of his existence, and in the centuries that followed, his followers wore amethyst as well, honoring both the god and the grandmother who had saved him. Years later, when Dionysus had established his cult and traveled the world, spreading the gifts of wine and ecstasy, he returned to Rhea's grove. He brought offerings, fine wine, the first fruits of the vine, garlands of ivy and grape leaves. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Rhea had smiled. That's what grandmothers do. But perhaps Rhea's most important intervention came with Demeter and Persephone. The abduction happened without warning. One moment, Persephone was picking flowers in a meadow. The next, the earth opened and Hades rose from below, dragging her down into the darkness. Demeter's grief was immediate and all-consuming. She searched everywhere, calling her daughter's name, refusing to eat or sleep. And in her sorrow, she withheld her blessings from the world. The crops withered, the fields turned brown, famine spread like a shadow across the earth. Zeus watched the mortals begin to starve and grew concerned. Dead mortals meant no sacrifices, and gods needed sacrifices the way fires need fuel. He sent messenger after messenger to Demeter, begging her to relent, to let the earth bloom again. But Demeter refused. Not until Persephone was returned, not until her daughter was safe. The impasse could have continued indefinitely. Demeter was stubborn, and Zeus was reluctant to force the issue. It was Rhea who finally broke the deadlock. She found Demeter in Eleusis, disguised as an old woman, sitting by a well and weeping. Rhea sat down beside her daughter and said nothing for a long time. Just sat there, sharing the silence and the grief. Finally, Demeter looked up and recognized her mother. "You don't understand," Demeter said, her voice breaking. "She's my daughter, my only child. I carried her and raised her and loved her. And now she's gone, taken by my own brother, and Zeus allowed it. He gave his permission. How am I supposed to forgive that?" Rhea took Demeter's hand. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't understand. Not exactly. Because I never had the chance to raise my children the way you raised Persephone. But I do understand losing them. I understand the pain of having your child taken from you. And I understand that grief is not something you get over. It's something you learn to carry." Demeter was silent, tears streaming down her face. "Persephone ate pomegranate seeds in the underworld," Rhea continued. "She's bound there now. You know that. You know the laws. But there's a compromise. She can spend part of the year with you and part with Hades. It's not perfect. It's not fair. But it's what we have." "I don't want compromise," Demeter said. I want my daughter back, I know." Rhea's voice was gentle. "But sometimes what we want and what we can have are different things, and we have to decide whether to accept the possible or remain locked in the impossible." It took time, but eventually Demeter agreed. She would return to Olympus. She would let the earth bloom again. She would accept the compromise. But every year, when Persephone descended to the underworld, Demeter would grieve. The earth would turn cold and barren, reflecting her pain. And every year Rhea would sit with her, saying nothing, just offering the quiet presence that said, "You are not alone. I am here. We will endure this together." As centuries passed, Rhea's role on Olympus became more and more ceremonial. She attended the great feasts, sat at the high table, offered blessings when asked, but she was no longer central to the stories being told. The age of the Olympians was in full swing, and they had their own dramas, their own heroes, their own myths. Rhea didn't mind. She had never sought fame or glory. She had done what needed to be done, and now she was content to rest. Her worship continued, though it was never as grand as that of the Olympians. On Crete, pilgrims still came to the cave where Zeus had been born. They left offerings of milk and honey, prayed for safe births and healthy children. The curette's descendants still performed the shield-clashing dance, keeping the old tradition alive. In other parts of Greece, her worship blended with that of Cybele, the Phrygian mother goddess. The two became almost indistinguishable, their rituals and symbols merging until it was hard to say where one ended and the other began. Both were mother goddesses. Both were associated with lions and drums and ecstatic dance. Both represented the primal power of motherhood and fertility. In Rome, when the empire rose and conquered Greece, Rhea was identified with Ops, the goddess of plenty and abundance. Her cult was brought to Rome with great ceremony, the Romans recognizing in her the same eternal mother figure they had always worshipped under different names. But beneath all the different names and forms, the essence remained the same. She was the mother who would do anything to protect her children, the grandmother who offered comfort in dark times, the goddess of ease and flow and the eternal turning of generations. She was the one who